to be putting a copy of this event on our website, and a special blog post I'll speak about at the end of today. And we will be going till about 3:30. And I know some folks have signed up, but last minute couldn't make it, or so we'll have the recording for them as well. And I'm just also letting people in, and I'll do my best here. So again, welcome. You may want to, if you're not familiar or want a reminder with Zoom, at the top right-hand corner, you can change your view settings. For today's speakers, you may want to use the speaker view. I'll be spotlighting the speakers to the large speaker view. But if you want to quickly see everybody's face, you can always drop into the gallery view and see each other. I will keep the chat box open. But please try to keep the traffic down to just a minimum. We'll have some Q&As for our speakers. You could either use the chat box or if you really wanted to ask your question, raise your hand. So there's some icons near the bottom of the reactions, and you can sort of raise your hand there as well. So without anything else, I'd like to welcome us all. I just want to remind you to try to keep yourself muted if you can. There's so far about 45 of us. I also wanted to introduce myself. I'm Paul Baines. I'm the CSJ Blue Community Program Manager. And I want to also thank the steering committee that helps guide this work as well. And they are a combination of sisters and associates. I want to thank Sister Bonnie Chesser, Sister Ann Cargis, Sister Cicely Hewitt, Sister Loretta Manzera, Sabrina Shafari, who's a staff person at the Toronto office, Rita Pullis and Judy Bowles, and Ruth Ann Ingram, who are associates as well. They help guide this work as we move into our 5th year here as a Blue community. In a second, we're going to hear from Sister Janet Speth, an opening prayer, but I wanted to also start us off with a land and water acknowledgement. And maybe as I say this, you can think about the lands and waters where you reside. And I'd also let you maybe use the chat box to say maybe which watershed you're joining from today. We're all in various watersheds. Now there's sort of 49 of us. Which watershed are you joining for today? And this is my opening land and water acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I live in the Mississauga Nishnabeg territory of Nogo-Jimwanong. Sorry about that. I want to acknowledge that I live in the Mississauga Nishnabeg territory of Nogo-Jimwanong, the place at the foot of the rapids. I'm able to live here because this treaty is also covered by the Williams Treaties signed in 1923 between what is currently called Canada and various First Nations such as Curve Lake, Alderville, Hiawatha, and Scugog Island. I also want to acknowledge that the spirit of this treaty was never upheld by Canada and Canadians. I commit myself and my efforts to reconciling and repairing the unequal impacts of this treaty. I often do this through my efforts in water protection and learning about how to live in this place with care, humility, solidarity, and education. So thanks everybody for joining today. I hope you can acknowledge the lands and waters where you are and how you plan on living that. I want to pass it over to Sister Janet Speth, who's also on the Federation Ecology Committee, to open us with a prayer today.
Good. Thank you, Paul. I just invite everyone first to just take a nice couple of deep breaths and land here. We've talked about our land acknowledgement, but we need to also land in this space. So I'll just give you a couple of seconds to do that. And then we will begin. A poem by Mary Oliver, By the River Clarion. And Paul, can you see this?
No, can you share your screen?
Yeah, sorry. I'll go back. Just a sec here. Sorry, just give me one sec. You know, you practice these things 2,000 times, and then when you try to do it, it doesn't go. Daisy's nodding her head. She knows. Okay. Can you just give me, I'll have you breathe a little bit here while I just reset my screen. Okay, I'll start. A poem by Mary Oliver, By the River Clarion. I don't know who God is exactly, but I'll tell you this. I was sitting in the river named Clarion on a water splash stone, and all afternoon I listened to the voices of the river talking. Whenever the water struck a stone, it had something to say. And the water itself, and even the mosses trailing under the water. And slowly, very slowly, it became clear to me what they were saying. Said the river, I am part of holiness. And I too, said the stone. And I too, whispered the moss beneath the water. I don't know who God is exactly, but I'll tell you this. I was sitting in the river named Clarion on a water splash stone, and all afternoon I listened to the voices of the river talking. Whenever the water struck a stone, it had something to say. And the water itself, and even the mosses trailing under the water. And slowly, very slowly, it became clear to me what they were saying. Said the river, I am part of holiness. And I too, said the stone. And I too, whispered the moss beneath the river. And let us listen to the voice of the river. Let us pray. O healing river, pour down your waters and heal your people and our planet, thirsting for clean and bountiful waters. We pray for all those who are thirsting for justice.
What's her name there too? Is it okay for her?
Who long for an equal sharing of resources among peoples and nations, who put their lives at risk to protect groundwater, streams, rivers, and oceans. Give us the courage to work together so that all creation will be gifted with abundant life.
Thank you so much, Sister Janet. That was great. We appreciate it. We'll move right into the main event with our two speakers. Just for a bit of context, in late 2017, just going to, there we go. In late 2017, the Federation of Sisters of St. Joseph became a Blue community. And since then, we've been trying to live and animate the following mandate. Reflecting the congregations of St. Joseph's charism of unity and reconciliation, we honor our responsibility to protect water as a human right, shared commons, and sacred gift. Through reflection, education, advocacy, and service, this program centers and strengthens our respectful relations to all the waters circulating our common home. And I know I mentioned my steering committee at the beginning there. I also wanted to mention the Federation Executive, Carol Umana. And I first heard of our first speaker, Emma, through a various gathering of London-based Blue communities and the Council of Canadians contact there, Mark Calzavera. There are now several Blue communities in the London area, and the CSJ Blue Community Program has been doing a lot of education and outreach to schools in the last year or so. And we want to connect more with younger people and water activists. Sorry, just going to remind everyone to please make sure I'm only person doing this, so please keep yourself muted. I wanted to ask Emma to introduce herself and her motivations and hopes for her school becoming a Blue community just last week. And she'll also take a couple of questions via the chat box if you wanted to type in your question, or you could raise your hand and I will try to see you and we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly to Emma herself. So Emma, I'm going to pass it over to you, and there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Harmos. You might see on promotional material that my last name is Firm, F-E-R-M, but my last name is Harmos. Sorry for the mix-up. I am a grade 12 student at Mother Teresa Catholic Secondary School in London, Ontario. I just want to say thank you very much for inviting me to share with you today our journey of certifying our school as a Blue community. So the journey initially began in June of 2022 at a student council seminar when we heard from guest speaker Clara Pretense. She is a student at Brescia University College, and she spearheaded the Blue Community Initiative at her school. And after hearing her story, it really inspired me. I was soon after elected to be a Minister of the Environment for the 2022 to 2023 school year student council. And I decided that that was the perfect opportunity to try and implement the same initiative at Mother Teresa. I wanted to display my citizenship in my school community to make our school more sustainable. Thankfully, I had a lot of support and from various student council teachers, most notably Mrs. Schned, who put in an immense amount of effort to help me with the project. So according to the Council of Canadians website, for those of you who don't know, Blue Community recognizes water and sanitation as human rights. It bans or phases out the sale of single-use plastic water bottles and promotes publicly financed, owned, and operated water and wastewater services. So although I only worked on this initiative for a relatively short time, I've always been against the use of single-use plastics. According to the David Suzuki Foundation, nearly 90% of single-use plastics in Canada end up in landfills, incinerators, lakes, parks, and oceans. So it was statistics like these that made becoming a Blue Community not only about the social justice aspect, but also about becoming a more environmentally sustainable school community. After some general calculations, I determined that becoming a Blue Community and banning the sale of single-use plastic water bottles, we could hopefully get rid of more than 26,000 bottles per year. And once I recognized the opportunity at our school and decided to act on it, I reached out to Clara Pretense, who had experience with the project, and to Mark Calzavera on the Council of Canadians to obtain more information. I then prepared a proposal, which I shared with fellow student leaders in the Student Council for feedback, and then presented to Mother Teresa's principal, Mr. Lamoureux, for approval. Our project consisted of phasing out the sale of bottled water at the school while still ensuring easy access to bottle filling stations and promoting the value of water as a human right through an education campaign. Now, thanks to Paul, we have informational posters to put up around our school, and we have also provided a Blue Community informational video to students from the Blue Community website. Hopefully, students will take advantage of these resources to further educate themselves and maybe even others. After securing commitment for phasing out the sale of bottled water at my school, I convened a working group comprised of a couple other students, Laiba Mushtaq and Sania Imran, who each took on specific project-related responsibilities. They provided much meaningful input and generously gave their time to help out. Myself, as the project lead, I was involved in the following ways. I corresponded with Mark Calzavera, as well as various other stakeholders, such as from the London District Catholic School Board, and I tried to maintain communication between our school and them. I co-developed an idea to provide students with reusable water bottles directed towards students who didn't have one themselves. And I liaised with the principal's office, RE, the installation of bottle filling stations, which is slated to proceed this year. Right now, we have 2 more water bottle filling stations currently in the works, with about 3 more hopefully on the way. And the plan is to have 3 or 4 bottle filling stations per floor at our school. The overall goal, and what I would say was the biggest obstacle to overcome, was to eliminate the single-use plastic bottled water sales. We had to think about a variety of concerns. For example, if someone came into the office and needed water for, let's say, an emergency situation, the school would have usually given them a single-use plastic bottle. However, this obviously wouldn't be able to work anymore. So now there are plans for water coolers in the office for emergencies where there just wouldn't be enough time to get to a water fountain. And like I just mentioned, our school also bought reusable MTS branded water bottles, such as this one right here, to give to students who don't have one themselves. And we encourage students who do not have access to a water bottle for whatever reason to simply ask, as we have many available at the office for students to take if needed. So last week on Wednesday, March 22nd, the United Nations designated World Water Day, our school committed to acknowledging access to water as a basic human right by officially banning single-use plastic water bottle sales in school. And in recognition of this initiative, MTS was officially awarded Blue Community certification and became the first high school in the world to receive this designation. We also became the 100th Blue Community in the world, so a very nice round number. At the ceremony last Wednesday, We had Mark Calzavera come all the way from Toronto to present the certificate. We had members from the Council of Canadians London sector, Superintendent Fernandez and Miss Denemy from the London District Catholic School Board, and Robin Michaud to perform an Indigenous water dance. Also, to promote our reusable water bottle initiative, we taped 10 tickets on the back of students' chairs and gave the recipients each a new MTS water bottle. And this sparked a lot of excitement because, of course, everyone was really excited. Oh, like, maybe I'll get a new water bottle. So my team and I were also very kindly invited by Superintendent Fernandez to speak at a London District Catholic School Board meeting about the project to maybe incite some interest there. And other London high schools have indicated their interest in this project, and I truly hope that they consider following through. Their participation would potentially reduce plastic waste by as much as 500,000 bottles per year in the London area. We are planning on making some informational packages to send to these other high schools and maybe even elementary schools to try to encourage them to do what we've done. I'm truly honored to have been part of such a meaningful initiative that could make some really big waves. This journey also demonstrates how action at the local level can be a catalyst for further change and have global impacts. MTS is now part of the other Blue communities all around the world that fight against the privatization of water and promote water as a human right. Like Albert Szent-Györgyi, a famous Hungarian biochemist and Nobel Prize winner, once said, "Water is life's matter and matrix, mother and medium. There's no life without water." Thank you immensely for your time and attention. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer.
Thanks so much, Emma. That was a great introduction to the work that you've been doing. I'm sure there's some good praise coming in the chat box. And if people can raise a hand if they wanted to use their audio and microphone. And also the chat box is available. We could probably take about 10-15 minutes for questions here with Emma taking time out of her day. Varka, I see your hand up. Let's go with Varka first.
Thank you. Emma, maybe you spoke about this, but maybe I was not paying attention. But I'm interested to hear about some of the education raising, awareness raising events that you have done with schoolmates, but also with parents, part of the school. So this initiative was popularized, but also the parents and students understood the importance of the initiative.
That's a very good question. So this is a relatively new initiative, so we still have a lot of plans that we need to work on in terms of involving the parents more, for sure. But right now we have shared a video from the Council of Canadians website on what a Blue community is. We've done announcements every morning to just kind of give a little bit more information about what a Blue community is. But yeah, we're still in the process of kind of involving more of our school community.
Emma, there's two questions in the chat box. One of them is quite simple. Without keeping your own life the way you like it, if there are other high school students interested in becoming a Blue community, what is the best way for them to learn about your school's experience?
So right now we're hoping to kind of create a step-by-step process of how we came to do this and send them out to other schools with the help of administration. Yeah, that's the plan at the moment.
I guess, is there a contact? Is there a way for people to get in touch with you that you feel comfortable with? Like, does the program have its own email, or is the vice principal or someone taking public calls? Or I guess that might be more about it as well.
At the moment, there's no official email address or anything, but I'm sure that if you just called the vice principal or Erin Schneid, she was the teacher who really helped with this project. I could maybe put her email below or something. They would be happy to answer any questions about this.
Okay, I'll leave it. Yeah, great. Emma can put anything in the chat box for any sort of contact information. I see one more question in the chat box, and I also see Elaine's hand, and I see Monica's hand, and then I think we'll call it at that for now. And so, someone in the London chapter, I think Lynn, maybe written. Emma, was there much pushback from students regarding the end of plastic bottled water use in the school? Maybe a little bit more about that, Emma, in terms of students who were really quite found this maybe an inconvenience to have such change.
So surprisingly, no, there wasn't very much pushback. I think that after they understood that they had really easy access to just get a reusable water bottle, it didn't really matter. I mean, it kind of was even easier for them because they don't have to like pay for a reusable water bottle every day. They can just have their a single-use water bottle every day. They just have their reusable one and go fill it up between classes. And yeah, that's that. Everyone was super supportive of the campaign. They were really, they were really interested in doing what they can to support it.
No, good to hear. Good to hear. Okay, I'm going to go to Elaine. If you could ask your question, that'd be great.
Wonderful work, Emma. I was interested in these water filling stations at the school. Does that involve new plumbing, or that's one question. And the other question was that with regard to the water bottles you're providing, are they plastic? Maybe a reusable plastic, of course, but just a question.
So yes, plumbing was a bit of we had to reconfigure some plumbing for sure for the new water bottle filling stations. But our very skilled custodial team got right on that, and it's finished. It took them a very short time. And these are plastic, yes, but they are reusable and they're good quality. So I think that they would last quite a long time.
I'll go to Monica. Can we hear from you? Yep. Unmute, Monica.
Emma, I would like to know what was the biggest challenge you were facing during this project?
The biggest challenge was definitely just officially saying, okay, yep, we have to get rid of all the plastic water bottles, or the single-use plastic water bottles, especially since we usually sell single-use plastic water bottles at like sports games and musicals and things like that at the school. So it was just kind of finding a way to make water accessible to people who are visiting from other schools, for example. So really it was just kind of making sure we encourage people to use water fountains as much as possible, and selling other drinks like juices. And yeah, I think that was really the biggest issue.
Okay, so at events, are you offering water jugs and glasses, or?
That is an idea that we've kind of been toying with. We haven't really settled on anything yet. Right now, it's just kind of using the water fountains and bringing your own reusable water bottle if you can. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much, Emma.
Well, Emma, I so appreciate your time for us today. Hopefully you can stay on with us. We're next going to hear from Sister Barbara Bozak and her experience coming back from New York City. I first met Barbara this past January when I was learning more about the upcoming United Nations Water Conference, since Barbara is the United Nations representative for the Congregations of St. Joseph. I'm sure we're all curious to hear about her observations from her recent at this event. And similar to Emma, she'll also take a couple of questions via the chat box, or again, it worked quite well there with just some simple unmuting and asking the question yourself. And so Barbara, thanks again for also joining us today with your busy schedule. I would like to sort of give you some time to report back.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Emma, too. I was really impressed by what you said. And you brought up some really good points in terms of water as a human right, and also the need to do away with single-use plastic. So I deeply appreciate that. Okay, as Paul said, my name is Barbara Bozak. I'm a sister of St. Joseph from the United States. I don't live in New York City, but I live not too far. Well, actually the commute is 3.5 hours each way, and I go into our office not too far from the United Nations at least once a week, and at times I'm there for a week for commission meetings or other events. As Paul said, I represent the congregations of St. Joseph at the UN in New York, but I'm also connected with Geneva, which is the Center for Human Rights of the United Nations. So we continue to do some work through the Geneva office from time to time. And right now I'm working on a report for Burkina Faso that I will send to Geneva. As a UN rep, we are in what they call general consultative status, which is the highest status an NGO can have at the United Nations, which gives us the opportunity to make statements, written statements, oral statements, during official UN meetings very often, and other connections with the UN system. I represent Sisters of St. Joseph worldwide, which means 4 federations. Those of you who are unfamiliar with this, Canada, the US, France, and Italy all have a federation of Sisters of St. Joseph. I also represent the 3 international congregations, and I'm a member of one of them, the Chambéry congregation. The other 2 congregations are Lyon and Annecy. The Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada certainly all know about Lyon, but you may not be as familiar with the others. And there are 2 independent congregations of St. Joseph, Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Australia. And so the Sisters of St. Joseph that I represent are present in well over 40 countries, and I represent something like 25 congregations. So we try to pull together things for many people, but obviously it's not the easiest task that I have here. As a representative at the UN, what do I do? Among other things, I participate in various UN meetings, and that would include annual commission meetings, which take place mostly in the spring, February, March, April, May, and one in July. They're week-long or 2-week-long events. I also go to special meetings, such as the Water Conference. And earlier in December, Sue Wilson from Canada and I were present at the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. So just to follow what's happening, be informed, and so that I can share the information and also offer any insights that I may have from our members to the UN body. I am actually the link between our members, the Sisters of St. Joseph, associates, co-workers, other friends, and the United Nations. One of my tasks, which I'm not the best at, is disseminating information about what is happening at the United Nations to others, to you. And we do that in different ways. But I also invite participation. So as Paul said, I was in touch with him earlier this year to invite him to come to the Water Conference in New York. He was not free and could not do that. And I also reached out to some of the sisters and justice coordinators in Canada, and they were not able to do it either. But had they been able to come, they would have been very welcome. We have had, pre-COVID, delegations from Canada to the Commission on Social Development in February and to the Commission on the Status of Women in March, and some other UN events. This year, we will have a delegation from Canada for the high-level political forum on sustainable development, which will take place in July. It's an annual event in July at which countries are invited to do what we call, or what is called, voluntary national review of how they are moving forward with the sustainable development goals. One of which, of course, is water. And the group, the justice coordinators in Canada, will be coming to Canada, to the UN, to New York for that. And BARC in particular, but others, are getting information on how they can participate to prepare for the high-level political forum as well. So I try to be the liaison between people and the UN. I also, as an NGO, try to bring grassroots voices to the UN deliberations so that during particular conferences we might invite individuals to speak, be it, if not in the halls of the UN per se, they're what we call side events, which are events that are held either on the UN premises or off-site, but that gather people from around the world to consider issues connected with the particular meeting. I just got back from the UN Water Conference, which was held March 22nd through 24th, so Wednesday through Friday of last week in New York City. I was at the UN for 2 days. I was unable to be there the third day because I am now in France. I left for France on Saturday, so I had to be at home on Friday. But it was a very interesting 2 days and a very full 2 days. It was quite amazing. As the UN said, this water conference was a historic opportunity for the world community. It gathered thousands, and I'm saying thousands of people from around the world. I have never seen the United Nations as congested with so many people there as I did those few days. There were people from Africa, from Asia, from the islands, from small developing countries, major countries, the indigenous peoples were all represented there. For what? This is the first time in almost 50 years that the UN has held a conference on water. Last one was held in 1977. I should do some history and see what that was about. But certainly at this point in time, the UN, the leaders at the UN recognize that this is a time of urgent need for water action. And so that was what this was about. As a typical UN meeting, there were plenary sessions where you had world leaders listening to leaders from government, from business, from finance, from academia, talk about the issue, talk about what the needs are, what needs to be done, how they're addressing it. Now, I've got to admit, I find those the least exciting, and I did not participate in any of them this year during the water conference. But then there were interactive debates on different issues. Water with food, water and energy, water and climate. And they took place each morning and afternoon, and I actually did follow one of them. And that was made up of panels who spoke on these different topics. And then they opened the discussion among themselves, and they opened it for questions from the floor. And that was interesting, but certainly not the most interesting piece that I was at. Where I really got a lot of information and learned a great deal was at the side events. They are events that are organized by NGOs with government representatives frequently, but not always. And they speak about what's going on the ground. So you really hear on the ground voices. What is being done, what the issues that need to be addressed are. I heard from people from Africa, from South Africa, from other nations, from the indigenous issues in different places. But if I was going to say in general, what is this about? It was about water as a human right, as Emma so well stated. Water is a human right. It has finally been acknowledged as a human right. In 1948, the UN accepted a Declaration on Human Rights. And among the human rights in that document are the right to food and the right to medical care, but not the right to water. It wasn't mentioned. Water was declared a human right only 13 years ago in 2010. We just haven't considered water. We take it for granted. We have it. We assume we will have it. And I think in 1948 and for many, many decades after, people just assumed that water was a natural resource and everyone had access to it. But as it's becoming commodified and taken over by big business and sometimes governments, because of the scarcity, that becomes more of an issue. And the human right to water becomes even more pressing and more urgent to address. one of the things that the water conference really was stressed was the interlinkages between water and other aspects of life. The indigenous say, and I've heard this said by the indigenous at the UN in New York, water is life. And we know that without water, there is no life. One of the focus points of the recent meeting was the link or the nexus between water and food security, water and nutrition. We don't have food without water. And yet many of the people who might be able to grow or try to grow their own vegetables, fruits, whatever, they have to pay for water. And then when they get the water and they have a limited supply, do they use it for the house or do they use it for their own agricultural purposes? It's a question that many vulnerable and poor people face on a regular basis. Why? Because water has been commodified. And it is the most vulnerable. The poorest people, the people who have the least, who have to make these decisions and who do not access their right to water. Some of the speakers said we need to consider the human face of water, not just water as a commodity, not just water as it is there, but how does it affect people? What is the availability of water? We are aware of the fact that in many countries, women are the ones who have to fetch the water. Women and girls fetch the water, are responsible for seeing that the family has it, for seeing that they have enough to be used. We don't have a lot of data on the access to water and the availability of water. And we need the data. So we need academia, we need the number crunchers to come in and tell us who and what are the circumstances on which water is available or not available, who has access and who doesn't. Why? So that good policy can be made, because policy depends upon data. Another aspect of water, which many of us, most of us probably don't think about, is the importance of fisheries. Fish live in water. And I heard, interestingly enough, there are 500 million small-scale fishers throughout the world, possibly more. And fish is a very important aspect of nutrition for many people, for the protein, but also for vitamins. So it really gives people health. The issue around fisheries is water pollution, which happens both in oceans, by the shores, farther out, plastic pollution, among other things, but also when there's oil spills or mining waste, when the sanitation is lacking, water gets polluted and then the fish die. Another issue with regard to fish is fish migration. We want dams for energy. The link between water and energy is yet another connection that needs to be taken into consideration. Water really is a cross-cutting element which touches every aspect of our life. And mostly we don't recognize. So it was very, very clear during the water conference at many of the events that I was at, that water is linked, lack of water or water issues are linked to food security or food insecurity. What we need to do, and what some countries are becoming better at, are sustainable agricultural practices. Now, certainly in my country, in the United States, I don't think we're addressing it at all. And yet it is very, very urgent that it be addressed. And in some countries, water subsidies are given to farmers, which means they overuse water, which means that the kind of irrigation, and everyone knows that irrigation is important, the kind of irrigation is not the most sustainable. If you saw the logo for the water conference, it was the circle of the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, with water in the center. And why? Because water is essential to being able to achieve the SDGs. If we don't deal with water, then we're not going to achieve the SDGs. The second SDG, no hunger, we need water for that. Good health, number 3, we need water for that. Gender equality, the women are the ones who are spending the time and energy to get water. The inequalities that we see with people who have access to water, those who don't, those who have money, those who don't. That's another SDG. You can go through any of the SDGs. Life on land, life underwater, sustainable city. Water is needed and needs to be addressed for all of these. And yet it is, as very few of us are willing to admit, a finite resource. It's a very limited resource. We don't even consider that. And so it was said by one of the speakers that we need to move from thinking of a project here and a project there to thinking of the whole system. We need to look at the whole picture when we're dealing with water. Because, as I said before, water is life. It is essential to life. It should be a public good, which it is not in every instance, not in every country, not in every place in every country. And interestingly enough, I'm not sure which ones do, but very few countries have a water policy. I did hear Ethiopia speak of their water policy, but it's very few countries that have done that. And yet that's what is needed. What we are aware of, countries give extractive industries, logging, mining, access to natural resources because it brings in wealth. Meanwhile, they're destroying water sources. They're destroying water sources through pollution of heavy metals, through oil spills which are ruining groundwater, through logging which pollutes rivers and also clogs them up. So part of the problem is major industries, large corporations, and the large agricultural businesses. So those need to be dealt with and need to be dealt with in a way that lets them continue, yes, but also take responsibility for what they're doing. And that has not been done up to the present in most instances. They walk away without ever having to take responsibility. The other issue, which we often don't consider or we don't explicitly talk about it, is the link between water and climate change. So there was an event that I attended, which had a number of different individuals speaking of moving from the water conference this year to COP28, which it will be the meeting on climate change next year, which will be held in the United Arab Emirates. And one thing that was stated as people were speaking in this event, 90% of climate change impacts are water related. Too much water, too little water, polluted water, whatever. And it was the focus of that particular, just most of the speakers said that water needs to be prioritized with climate. Last year at COP27 in Egypt, the conference on climate, one day was dedicated to water. And that was the first time it ever happened. This time, people are saying they need to have a focus. Water needs to become a central issue when we're talking about climate. We need to learn in these conferences, work together to draw up a roadmap for water management, to protect water, to protect ecosystems, to look at how we use water, how we manage wastewater, what the distribution of water is, and what we can do to protect water and biodiversity. And the other thing that we seldom think of is the fact that waterways are frequently covering more than one country. So it's a transboundary issue. So we need transboundary cooperation. Certainly the Great Lakes between the United States and Canada are one perfect example. St. Lawrence River would be another one for you. So we need to protect those waterways, the major waterways that move across boundaries. And we also need to see how we can protect our rivers, our wetlands, and all those waterways and riverbeds that actually protect the land and the population, the people, from the ill effects of damaging storms. So this whole conference was about relationships and linkages and the need for good water management and good water use. And it was interesting, both Singapore and Ethiopia presented sustainable solutions. There are solutions out there. Some industry is actually beginning to take some responsibility, but all the governments need to look more closely at sustainable solutions. Give support to the industries and the groups that are willing to do it, the ones that have the ideas. Because in Singapore, which has is very water sensitive because they don't have access to a lot of water, they purify and desalinate water to use in agriculture, which is one possibility. They can use the circular economy for water is very important. Ethiopia uses rainwater collection for small-scale agriculture, and they're also looking at the importance of the forestry to keep food production going and to keep the water sources active and alive. So there was much to learn, but many questions certainly raised, and the recognition that we need to continue this conversation. We have far to go, but we do have at least people that are beginning to talk about it, beginning to see the interconnections, and are willing to say that all of us worldwide, all governments, academia, finance, and corporations, and individual people need to take their responsibilities and do what they can to protect our waters, because without water, we have no life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that little report. That says so much, Barbara. I can see how hard it would be to condense so many big ideas into a small space. We do have some more time to tap into your experience and your perspective. I would encourage anyone to use the chat box or maybe to raise a hand. Let's talk with Barbara a little bit more. Yes, I see Kathleen here. You can unmute yourself, Kathleen. That'd be great.
Barbara, I do quite a bit of work with Indigenous people in Canada. My question is, to what extent is the UN actively involved with Indigenous peoples worldwide in being consultants and how to best protect the water? My reason for my question is I think they do have some answers that maybe we would not be aware of.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's an excellent question. Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I'm not sure that the UN or many people are looking to the Indigenous peoples for solutions with regard to water. Although they will tell you, and that's true, that they are the ones frequently impacted most negatively, and they do know how to care for water. There is an annual event at the United Nations, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which takes place for 2 weeks at the end of April or beginning of May each year, where Indigenous people come from across the world to address their own issues. And it's very informative. It's really excellent. But I certainly have heard on more than one occasion and at the water conference, Indigenous people saying, we need to be at the table. The reality is the UN is what? It's a body of governments. So the reality is that government officials talking to one another. And how often do they get other people at the table? Occasionally. Now, they have not, as far as I know, really invited Indigenous people to the table for these kinds of discussions. They have invited some other NGO or some other groups occasionally. But it is certainly something that has come up repeatedly, and hopefully it will come to fruition one of these days, because they do have suggestions. They have a wisdom that we need.
Two more questions in the chat box, Barbara, maybe you could see them, but definitely this connection between energy and water is a big one, particularly the hydropower and the use of dams. I know that it's even a big issue in Canada and Quebec and in British Columbia, but maybe I guess, could you highlight a little bit for us what might the conversation, where is the conversation at when it comes to dams? Because I guess there's this competing narrative regarding carbon and climate change and getting off of fossil fuels, which for some, I even think Norway is investing quite heavily in hydropower and what they call water batteries. Anything you could, any light on that you could shed, Sister Barbara?
To be honest with you, I don't really have a lot of information there, but it certainly is true. I mean, when Sue Wilson and I were in Montreal for the biodiversity conference, I went to one event where they were talking about how companies, with their green economy or whatever. And one of the women who spoke was from Hydro-Quebec. And, this is great because it's green energy but it destroys the lands of the indigenous. It destroys ecosystems. And that happens throughout the world. I mean, in India, in Brazil, I mean, I'm aware of situations where people have lost their everything. I mean, they've lost their possessions because of the dams. So, what we realize is it's a very complex. Water in and of itself, which is so important, is a very complex issue. There's no easy answer. Probably we're going to keep the dams that we have. We're probably not going to say never again. Possibly, we need to find other ways. We need to find solar. I mean, hydropower has been very valuable. And, for things like hydro power through Niagara Falls, I think was brilliant. But when it's man-made, then we always come to issues. So what people are saying is we need more nature-based solutions, not that we would impose things on nature, but try to use nature more effectively to come to some of these, to solve some of our issues. And solar, I think, is a way, and wind is a way. But hydro, I think, is going to be with us. But we just need to see how we can do that without destroying too much.
Thank you. We've got a hand up from Elaine again. Yep, Elaine Cole.
I was just wondering if making water a human right would allow for more emphasis in decommodifying water or more push toward decommodifying. Just wondering.
One could hope. The reality is, who runs the world? You have governments on the one hand, you have major corporations on the other. You have the lobbyists who, in at least my experience, who are trying to get what they think is important for them, which is usually making money, to pass laws and protect them, the large corporations. Water is a commodity, for example. I do think if we would begin to use less bottled water, I think, Emma, you're brilliant about that. When I see in the United States, in Connecticut, where I live, where we have perfectly good water coming through the tap, people are buying these huge numbers of small bottles of water. Why? So, I'm not sure how to begin to change that. Plastic, yes, we need to deal with the plastic. And I would hope that we would say, stop the commodification of water. But, if that's going to happen, it's got to come from the grassroots. And one of the things that we are all responsible for is knowing what our governments have agreed upon and holding them responsible for doing it. Frequently, governments agree to something. They'll sign a treaty. They'll say yes to this. Fine, it looks good, But do they do it? Not necessarily. And they can get away with it unless we, a little person on the ground, says, wait a minute. You said this, you must do it. So it's really the grassroots, I think. If that change will occur, it's got to come from the grassroots. It's not going to come from the top.
There are some questions regarding, again, this idea of power and, the power or lack thereof of Indigenous nations with their representation at these gatherings, either formally or informally, as compared to Nestle and Access. And I also see a new question here from Leah. Nestle had a front and center seat at the UN gathering on banning single-use plastics in the fall. They got the microphone to talk about their commitment to sustainability. I was quite appalled. They were given such a spotlight. So maybe a bit, Barbara, on this. Yeah, but more. Anything else to add on this? These access.
Well, I mean, the fact is, these large corporations somehow weasel their way in. And sometimes it's because their government puts them on their official delegation. At COP27 in Egypt, which was on climate change, and the focus was more on fossil fuels and banning fossil fuels, apparently some countries had half of their delegation, so it could be 20 people, from large oil companies. So part of it, we can say the UN, but the UN is made up from the countries. And unless the countries are willing to take the stand on that, it's not going to happen. So for example, and I can't speak specifically to Nestle's, and I agree that it's horrible that these large companies get to take the floor and say how wonderful they are. Countries do that too, to be honest with you. When you're listening to their meetings, what they're talking about, what they're doing, it's what the wonderful things are. They're not talking about the problems, the issues, what they need to be addressed generally. So, was Nestle there as part of a delegation from a country where Nestle is located? I'll say Switzerland, but I don't want to blame Switzerland. So we need to speak up, because that's the only way anything's going to be done or anything's going to change. And believe it or not, we, NGOs, have a voice that sometimes is heard if we get to the right people. So we just need to keep doing this. And you need to present the issues that are important to you so that we can bring them to powers that be.
I'll just add, I see a quick hands. We are going to try to finish today around 3:30. I will say, bringing these things back to the local level, because as Barbara said, governments also like to promote themselves. Just for a little bit of context on some of this access to power, there's an article coming out in this area where I live near Peterborough, the Peterborough Examiner and the Kawartha Now. I wrote an article regarding some of these issues around bottled water, and in doing so, I had to do a bit of research. And you may find some of these numbers alarming. So if you live in the city of Peterborough and you want 1 million liters of water, you have to pay $833. If you're Nestle or Blue Triton or Ice Springs or the place up near Collingwood, Feverham, they pay the provincial government only $500, basically, for 1 million liters of water. And none of that money goes towards the First Nations. And then when you go to Costco and buy Nestle, Pure Life, or the Kirkland brand, both which are spring water, and these are some of the cheapest places to buy bottled water in this area, you will pay $389,000. The tap water is 2% the cost of bottled water. And what that person or persons buying 1 million liters of packaged water will be producing 2 million water bottles. Just for 1 million liters will be 2 million water bottles. So these numbers are at play here in Ontario with some of the rules in which who gets what and who doesn't get what. Because as we know, just down the street, just down the watershed from where Nestle and Blue Triton are taking water, there are Indigenous communities, 6 Nations of the Grand being one, which don't have the human right to water through all of the residential places. I know we've got some more hands and questions. I will prioritize the visual. And so Donna, maybe one of our last questions before we do a closing with Sister Janet Speth again.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Sister Barbara, thank you so much for your wisdom and your perseverance and passion on this issue. I'm the chairperson for Development and Peace for the Diocese of Peterborough. One thing, just off the top of my head, we still have 39 boiled water advisories in effect across Canada for our Indigenous reservations. So that's still something that hasn't been fulfilled by the Truth and Reconciliation report. What we've done with Development and Peace, we're working very hard on, we've had many signatures for petitions to the Canadian government around developing guidelines for mining companies, Canadian mining companies in other countries, in terms of expropriation and, as you say, all of the natural resources. So I agree with you, and I feel very strongly that I don't feel confident, for example, the governments in Brazil or some of the other global South countries would come up with a water policy, but I do think it's incumbent upon the countries such as Canada to develop a water for policies in general about those companies going into the global South and other countries. So that's where our focus is right now with Development and Peace.
Thank you. I mean, I do, I work with the group, the mining working group at the UN, where we're dealing with water is one of the big issues because mining destroys water. And we have brought Indigenous persons to the UN through the mining working group to speak on that. And the reality is we have discovered the majority of the mining companies that are doing this mining and destruction of land and water I say in Brazil, but in many other places, are Canadian. I mean, they're Canadian based, not that they're from Canada per se, but somehow Canada has protected them because you get the majority of the mining companies based in Canada. And I don't know why, I can't tell you that. So if anything you could do in that regard, but I don't know if the Canadian government can control them. That's the other thing. I mean, governments can't always control what some of these companies are doing, especially if they're multinationals. So one of the things we're trying to do also is to get like a treaty or an agreement with regard to making the multinationals responsible. And this is through Geneva that this is being done, but be responsible for the destruction and what their work, how their work is impacting humanity negatively, and that they need to take responsibility for that. It's a long, slow process, but hopefully something will be done.
Janet?
May I ask a question? Thanks. Just to kind of throw a wrench in the conversation, perhaps, but also to point to the complexity of the issue. I'm interested, I was interested in the fact that Nestle's was at the UN talks and was making, their statement around their concern over plastic, first one-use plastic. And so I'm just wondering when, for some of this to happen, some of these big companies also have to be part of the solution. And so how do we evaluate them as being allies, even if they're shifting a little bit, or do we always sort of just simply write off their efforts as some kind of whitewashing or something like that? So I just think that's kind of an important thing to consider. And how do we read that? That would be my question.
I totally agree with you. Okay. When I was in Montreal at the biodiversity, and I went to this event where there were people speaking about, it was about biodiversity and what they're doing in that regard, but it was major companies. Okay. And I talked about Hydro-Quebec, but there was also Vale, which is a big mining company in Brazil, where they, there were tailing dams were broken of tailing holding ponds, which just destroyed the environment. And I mean, it was horrible. And there was a woman there saying, well, Vale is now talking with indigenous peoples and all this sort of thing. And you're beginning to say, well, wait a minute, what's going on? But it made me think, as you said, Janet, that we need to bring them into the conversation. And some companies, okay, are beginning, I think, to recognize that they need to take some responsibility. And as it is true for governments, it's also true for large corporations. It's the people on the ground, the grassroots, that could put pressure on them to make some kind of changes. If we don't accept what they're doing and show that in some way, they begin to rethink, and maybe it might be baby steps, but begin to make some steps forward. I think of what was done in Florida with regard to tomato growers and was it Wendy's? And Taco Bell. People wouldn't go there anymore because they weren't giving enough money to the tomato growers. And they wound up actually forcing the hand of that company, of a major corporation, to pay just a few pennies more to the tomato growers to make it so that they were getting a better wage. So we do have power. I mean, it's not easy, and it's got to be a lot of us, but we do have a power. Thank you for bringing that up. I think you're right. We need to engage with them.
Thank you.
Well, we're engaging here, I guess. There are 48 of us still here, and I just want to thank all of our participants for their questions, their curiosity, their comments. I know that this is part of an ongoing work that we do. I know that on what registered, half the people registered today were sisters, and the remainder were made up of CSJ staff and associates and all of our various water allies in this work, groups like Development and Peace. Good to see you, Donna. And so, yeah, hopefully we can be sharing these messages, and if we can't control necessarily the political or licensed for these operations, we can take away a little bit of the social license and shift the culture. I'll say a few more words in closing regarding our program and things on the horizon. But if there's no more questions for Barbara or for Emma, we'll have a closing prayer by Sister Janet Speth as well. So,
Great, thanks, Paul. I just have a very brief reflection before I start the prayer. The first time we heard the voice of water at the beginning, it was very low or perhaps silent. And I think that with the wonderful presentations we've had from both Emma and Barbara, also with our own increasing consciousness and the reality that water is now a human right, the voice of water is getting louder, and we're really beginning to listen. So let us take another minute and listen to the voice of water again, speaking its truth. Nope, they're coming.
a screen share as well, right?
Yep, okay, I'm coming. I'm coming. Challenge to make things seamless. Okay. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis reminds us, as Christians, we are also called to accept the world as a sacrament of communion, as a way of sharing with God and our neighbors on a global scale. He tells us that it is our humble conviction that the divine and the human meet in the slightest detail in the seamless garment of God's creation, in the last speck of dust of our planet. Water is an essential part of this seamless garment. Here too, the human and the divine meet. Glorious Creator, we give you thanks for all you are and do for us. You entrust us with responsibility to care for creation. Help us to understand how intricate and fragile your creation can be. Give us knowledge to learn from nature itself. Show us how to be part of your healing design for our world. Amen.
Thanks again, Sister Janet. That was wonderful. I'm glad we got to hear the voice of water a little bit there this afternoon, sorry. We are almost at the end of our program. I wanted to thank Sister Janet for the opening and closing prayer. I wanted to thank Emma, our high school student, starting her journey on becoming a Blue community for her school and inspiring other schools. Hope to stay in touch in the months and years ahead, and hopefully our resources can be of use. And again, big thanks to Sister Barbara for bringing your large experience and world experience here to our smaller Blue community when it comes to the global level of change. As I said at the beginning, we are recording this event, and it will be made available. Made a special sort of World Water Day blog post. I'll share the link in the chat box just in a second. Over the past few weeks, we've been pretty busy. Again, I want to thank my steering committee, who I mentioned earlier, and the Federation Executive Director, Carol Umana. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been sort of printing off a revised large poster, sort of 2 feet by 3 feet large, mailed out over 180 of these posters to about 20 different schools, not only in Ontario, but we've had a few requests from outside Ontario as well, for schools and school boards and classrooms to stimulate conversations and reflections on water. New this year is a 9-page sort of digital download companion guide for educators or the general public to use to sort of understand a bit more about some of the images and imagery in the poster, with current statistics, resource links, educator guides, and as such. And so you can find those on our website under a new section called Our Resources. And some of our other upcoming plans for this year, which those in the group today maybe want to be aware of or help us connect, looking for any sort of ravine or waterway cleanups. Often the springtime or the fall is a time to sort of show our service for the voice of water. And maybe there is a local water cleanup near you, and maybe there is some support that we could do as a Blue community to help that in any way. So if there is an event happening near you, please get in touch with me. I'll also put my contact information in the chat box. On the issue of bottled water, we're also looking for, if there is an event that you go to this in the summertime that or that you know of or is popular where you live, that serves bottled water for just lack of creativity or whatever reasons why, we'd love to maybe work with you to sponsor a water truck. Increasingly, municipalities are filling large trucks with taps on them and bringing them to events so people can refill their bottles. And so if there's an event like that that you think would be a useful way to us to show our service, please again, get in touch with me so we can contact the organizers and see what we can do. So we don't want to just do education. We don't want to just do these acts of service. This is all part of our work. When it comes to advocacy, you'll see in our most recent World Water Day blog post that we has signed on with hundreds of other nonprofits and groups and organizations around the world to a up-to-date current critical water manifesto that was signed on behalf of the Federation by Sister Sue Wilson, who is here with us today. And so we are part of a much larger movement of faith and political and educational and civic groups trying to raise awareness and education and use our advocacy at whatever level is needed. And if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletter on our website, you can also sign up directly. And usually every sort of 2 months or so, it's a bit of a roundup of news, events, program updates, and the like for what we've sort of been up to these last little while as well. I'll put there also the blog post of the special blog post from World Water Day that is already done, but I'll update that with the recording of today, and I'll email that out to everybody who is registered here today. But also on this sort of same sort of themed World Water Day, there is a lecture that was recorded last October in Toronto as part of called Waves of Change. This is a special lecture from water activist Maud Barlow, who through the Toronto congregation organized a special event at St. Mike's College. So you can see a recording of that video as part of the blog page. You can see the water manifesto that was sort of signed and the information about the educational poster and resource kit that we've just designed as well. So all of that you can sort of find in the blog post I just put in the chat box, but I'll also email this out to everybody who joined us today. Yeah, I think that's got all of it sort of done quickly. So unless there's any more questions from anybody in the group, please, if you wanted to use the chat box to thank any of our speakers today, I know both of them have put in their contact information. I'll do the same actually. And maybe if there are no other, yeah, I wanted to thank the Ecology Committee yet again. And, you know, while these issues are quite global, as Sister Barbara sort of spoke about, and there are lots of, you know, agriculture, energy, housing, poverty, gender. There are so many transportation. There are so many intersecting ways in which water works, not just globally, but locally. So what I would encourage everybody here to sort of maybe learn a little bit more about the watersheds that you live in. What are some of the major ways in which that watershed is appreciated? What are ways to access the water, to appreciate the water, to help protect and serve the water? But also, what are some of the major threats to the quality or the quantity of that water? You know, I mentioned in my opening land and water acknowledgement that Peterborough, this area, Nogojinwanong, means in the language of the Mississauga, the place at the foot of the rapids. Well, there are no more rapids here. The Trent Severn Waterway and the lift lock system to create energy and for boat transportation has made those rapids into a series of flat sort of lakes. And so these issues are also in our backyards. And so I encourage everybody here to learn about their watersheds, learn about those threats and those opportunities for gratitude. Monica, I see you've got a hand raised. Maybe you want to give some closing words for us?
Thank you so much. Yeah, no question. I just have a comment. To me, it all comes back to respect for nature. And as long as the politicians and the big corporations are run by money, water will remain a commodity and will. So if we want to see change, yes, we can see it, but it has to come from people power. It has to come from us, from the ground up. And that's the only thing, the grassroots, that have ever brought positive change in history. So we all have to get out of our comfort zone and get loud, you know, be polite, but get loud. make your voice heard. Thanks you so much for this wonderful event. And bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. And thanks for everybody joining today. This year's theme, I guess, of the World Water Day was accelerating change. We hope to be one small part of that as our little hummingbird as part of the solution. I hope everybody today can spend some time appreciating the water that intersects with their lives, and for those who don't have that same privilege as well. Again, thanks again to our co-presenter, Janet Speth, and our two guest speakers, Emma and Sister Barbara. So take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Please stay in touch. Take a look at our blog post, join our mailing list, and until next time. Bye-bye.